everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Ampliverse Book Club. Allie and RJ here, very excited to talk about a new book. This is the new book in our book club. It is Detransition, Baby by Torrey Peters. Which, realizing now after reading the book, it's basically like, what are the main themes of the book? Detransition, comma, baby. I was like, oh, it's a list.
It's the tags.
It's
The
the
book.
tag.
It's the tags. Yeah.
Hashtag detransition. Hashtag baby.
Mhm.
All right. So we're gonna give you the jacket copy just to get everyone up to speed. A whip-smart debut about three women, transgender and cisgender, whose lives collide after an unexpected pregnancy forces them to confront their deepest desires. Reese almost had it all: a loving relationship with Amy, an apartment in New York City, a job she didn't hate. She had scraped together what previous generations of trans women could only dream of: a life of mundane bourgeois comforts. The only thing missing was a child. But then her girlfriend, Amy, detransitioned and became Ames, and everything fell apart. Now Reese is caught in a self destructive pattern, avoiding her loneliness by sleeping with married men. Wow. Ames isn't happy either. He thought detransitioning to live as a man would make life easier, but that decision cost him his relationship with Reese, and losing her meant losing his only family. Even though their romance is over, he longs to find a way back to her. When Ames's boss and lover, Katrina, which HR, hello,
Right.
reveals that she's pregnant with this baby and that she's not sure whether she wants to keep it, Ames wonders if this is the chance he's been waiting for. Could the three of them form some kind of unconventional family and raise the baby together? Whew. It's a lot. It's definitely a lot. And I think what is really interesting about the book as I read it is that it was a true fast-paced game of ping pong. Like there was just so much happening, so many new things kept coming up, like that you discovered about the characters, that it was hard to kind of be like, well, I feel sorry for this character, but then I felt sorry for this one, and it was just very complicated. So very good job, Torrey Peters, on
Yeah.
on making a very complicated web.
And I want to say this book was very challenging to me, and in the sense that like it made me think a lot about my opinions, and so I want to give myself my own disclaimer and say some of the
Yeah,
things that I am sharing and reacting to might not be the right take, and
yeah,
might be not. I mean, maybe it will be offensive. Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm coming into
yeah,
this from a position where I'm like, I'm going to be sharing the best way that I can, but I'm
yeah,
also recognizing that like I'm coming to this from a position of relative ignorance.
yeah,
So,
totally, yeah. And also, like, definitely someone who, like, as a cisgendered man, like, I will never know that instinct of motherhood and like wanting to give birth. I will just never know that. And so the closest I can do is empathize, obviously. So I can always empathize with like that feeling of wanting. But yeah, like I am also like, I might be like, I don't understand what the big deal is, but it's like I will never know. So it's like
yeah.
I just have to constantly like remind myself like this is an experience that I won't be able to relate to, you
Yeah.
know?
I feel like too, like when we talked about Good Company, we were like, we
Hmm.
can't relate to this because blah 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 blah.
We're
I
not, we're poor, too poor.
We're too poor. We're like whatever. But there was a part of me that felt like I couldn't understand Reese's central like wanting, like her I want song, because like
Yeah.
I don't want children. And so I feel like
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing to come from it, of a place where like I'm like, I don't really want kids. I don't understand, like I don't
Hmm.
understand, so anyways, okay. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
So there's that. I will say, like, to start, like, Allie and I wanted to do just a little bit of research, obviously, as we talk about this book, because, we are coming from a cisgendered perspective. We don't know a lot about the community. And I think the main one is honestly the terminology of transgender, like, fully understanding what exactly does that mean, because the book does use both transgender and transsexual in different ways, and we were not really sure. Like, we thought this was an archaic term. I thought transgender was kind of like the overall term. And so in the research, transgender is the umbrella term. It's essentially the idea that my sex is not aligned with the gender identity that I have. And so trans is kind of the umbrella term that is used as a personifier, like how people identify themselves. The other term is often used to communicate that there are medical changes involved, such as hormones or surgery, in order to align my gender, in order to align my sex with my gender. But because of its like historical connotation, that like it's an illness or a deviant, a lot of a lot of the trans community really don't like using that term. So, but fully understood like the book, and obviously the author is trans herself, and wanting to kind of bring the reality of what that other term means, that like there is a sense of like there are people in the trans community that have their own kind of decisions that they make, whether they want to do hormones or surgery, or they just want to live out their gender expression how they want it to be. So I definitely learned that as I read
Yeah.
the book. So let's start off with so there are three central characters, right? Reese, Ames, and Katrina. And the book starts off as a in the Reese's point of view, and I would say like the book mostly follows Reese's point of view, although we do get Ames and Katrina stories intertwined. There's a concept in the beginning of the book that Reese explains, the Sex and the City problem, which gets brought back right at the end. But essentially, it's that every cisgender woman, no matter how hard feminism or like just how hard the world kind of works to kind of define, we ultimately still end up defining women as the four characters of Sex and the City. Obviously it gets renamed in multiple ways and they just redefine it all the time, but it's always like you're the career woman, the creative woman, the sexual person, or like the family person, so it's like what yeah, it's just that's just how it always is. And then they kind of like Reese kind of defines the problem, because for trans women, they don't get that privilege to be able to choose that. Like that is a privilege for women to just be like, who am I? What am I? Like trans women don't have that privilege because they're immediately like, you are a trans woman, first and foremost. And she kind of says in the beginning of the book that like that is something that they they want to be able to have that choice, to be able to just like categorize themselves. And it's like, then what's the point, But then at the end of the book, when they do kind of have to face the decision whether they want to create this like new family unit, Ames was the one who brings it up. Like, you keep talking about this problem. This could be an opportunity to finally break that problem
Mm-hmm.
if we really want to. And then we're jumping the gun, but it ends there. We don't get a confirmation what happened.
Yes, it was just like the end.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like as a woman, Allie, I'm curious like how you felt. It definitely was focused a lot on like yeah, just like what it truly means to be a woman, the absence of that for trans women, and like yeah.
I Here is what I will say, and I think that this might be what might be considered like my most controversial opinion of it, is that I had an issue. I felt like Katrina was a plot device. I think
Yeah.
my biggest issue, I think to me, I almost it would have remedied it if there had been, because it was really told like it was the three central characters, but it was really only
Mm-hmm.
told from Reese and Ames's point of
Reese and
view.
Ames, yeah.
I wish that we had gotten Katrina's point of view. And I understand that I'm coming from a place of being like a cisgender woman and identifying with her the most,
Yeah.
and that's where that's coming from, but it was hard for me to see like the whole thing was the baby, like the baby was what
Yeah.
was bringing Ames and Reese back together,
Yeah.
and it didn't seem like Katrina. I did enjoy, there was a scene, we don't have to talk about it yet, but there was a scene when they were at the like GLAAD awards and they were in a
Mm-hmm.
lobby and they were talking about it. I felt like that was the most agency that Katrina was given throughout the
Katrina
entire book.
had, yeah, totally.
And I wished that, and it didn't even need to be throughout the whole book, even if it had just been like
Yeah.
two key points where it was told from Katrina's point of view. I just
Yeah.
I felt like that was missing, and I did kind of take some issue with that.
Yeah, I remember there I literally bookmarked it and underlined it actually when she was like, "I'm just the host of your dream. Like
Yeah.
I am just here." She literally says, "I feel like I am just like a vessel so that you can live out your little fantasy." So it's like, then what do I, which ultimately at the end, like she's her decision is, do I want to keep this baby or not? Because I I don't have the same like stability or structure that I perceive families that's not here. And like that is ultimately like her trump card. And it does feel like it kind of stops there, that it's like that's just it. She's the will she won't she. And yeah, I do feel like she gave into it really quickly.
Mhm.
I mean, okay, understanding that when an important point of the book is that Ames doesn't come out to Katrina about his past as a woman
Mhm.
until after Katrina says, "I'm pregnant."
Mhm.
Um, and there was a line that Reese said, that, or Katrina said, that like you never told the truth until there was no other option but to tell the truth. So I think like there is that sense, like I was like, I want more of that. Like I
Yeah.
want to know more about how she processed that, because there was a, the only way we got to see that is by her having an outlet, like her outing Ames basically
Mhm.
in like a very unprofessional
Yeah.
setting.
Yeah.
First of
Yeah.
all, don't have dinner with clients. Let's just say that now. Don't ever have dinner with
And
clients.
if you have to, don't drink in front of them.
Don't drink in front of them. Also, when you're pregnant, don't do that.
Yeah.
I was so confused with that. I was like, wait, she's
Mhm.
pregnant. Why is she drunk? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, that's the problem.
Yeah. I think I think for me too, it brought up it reminded me kind of like the really interesting conversations that we're having right now as a society, as a culture, about consent and
Mhm.
what that means. And have you seen I May Destroy You?
No, I have not. I know I
Okay.
have to.
Okay. I don't
It's
I
it's one of those things where it's like, I know it's going to be a tough thing to watch, but I
Yeah.
have to watch this because this is her like opus, basically. Like this is
Well, and
like,
I don't want to give spoilers for you, but
yeah,
it did remind me a lot of a certain situation that I
that
found
happened.
really kind of, again, challenged me a lot to just think of. And I just think it's a larger conversation, and it's not a black and white thing when you're thinking about like someone giving consent. Like, what does that
Mhm.
mean? Does it and it was I was kind of thinking about this before we were talking of like, are you, if you're holding something back because you think the person would say no if they knew that information, like,
Mm,
kind of gets you in the weeds there.
yeah.
And so yeah.
Ugh. It There were many moments where I did feel sorry for Katrina the most, just because she really truly was a device. Like she felt like a
Mhm.
tool. And when she would come into her decision with like of, at least as we believe, terminating the pregnancy, it made sense to me because of all the things that just kept being proven to her, that like this is an unstable, how can I expect two people to parent my children when they don't even know who they are? Which I will say, in straight, like normal, straight, hetero, and I love that Katrina was like, I love, that's my new term, heteronormative. Like I'm using it everywhere, blah, blah, blah. That's something that like straight couples, I feel like don't have that issue. It's like, well, we'll figure it out together. I mean, obviously, like people are different, but it's not as like stigmatized, because when Ames was like, I think I can be a parent, but I can't be a father, I was like, wow, that's even a deeper level of like, yeah, like
Mhm.
that's something that straight people don't have to think about. It's like, so that was kind of nuts. I do want to talk a little bit about motherhood since we're in the topic, and like we've already kind of discussed that Reese's motherhood is something that like we are like, okay, I can't really fully relate, but I
Mhm.
understand like why she has that. But it's funny because her motherhood wasn't really like in the traditional sense. I mean, like even when she was in a relationship with Amy at the time, it was fully to be like, I think she's so beautiful. I can make her beautiful trans woman. I see like
Mm.
so much potential in her. And even, Ames was saying like as Amy, that's what the relationship felt like with Reese, that like she was being mothered rather than like being like a actual lover.
Mhm.
So I don't know how did you feel about that? Because there are times where I could relate of like, okay, like mentorship, okay, I get it,
Mhm.
but like it gets really muddy because I think she's so convinced that like to be a fully passing woman, I need to also connect with this like motherhood. It's like that's like the peak of like I will be a full woman if I am also a mother, you
Yeah,
know?
I think one of the things that, and maybe this is taking us off topic, one of the things that was interesting to me, and that again that I'm never going to be able to fully grasp the concept, is this idea of like what makes a woman. because
Yeah.
because it's like, I I don't think that motherhood is the end all be all of
The
what's
end all
going to
be
make
all.
me a woman, but I also say that from the privilege of, if I wanted to bring life into this world, I have the
That
correct, you know,
it's like the one thing no one else
right,
can do that but a
right.
woman. Yeah.
And so to me it's like, well, why, maybe we need to be redefining what the idea of a woman is. And one of the things that
Mhm.
I was thinking a lot about is, um like, how we're conditioned growing up and seeing the
Yeah.
roles that, parents are playing. And I think, you know i I think one of the illuminating things for me was, because we didn't get a ton into Reese's childhood in the way that we did for Ames, but
Mhm.
the one like real kind of glimpse into it was when she was ice skating, and she
Yes.
she felt like that was the first time that she was kind of seen for who she was,
Yeah.
and that like her gender, or her sex didn't really matter to this mother figure in her life.
Mhm.
And I think that that's partly what she thought being a mother was seeing a child
The real
for, yeah,
person.
right,
Yeah.
right, when it is that, but it's also so much more than that, like it's
Yeah.
also putting their needs, and being a solid figure in the
Being an
child's life,
actual responsible
yes,
person
yes,
so that a person doesn't die. Yeah.
yes, yes, it's, and
Ugh.
so yeah.
Yeah, I definitely see that. And I think like throughout the book, that's what we kept getting, right? Visions of how Reese was trying to find the epitome of like womanhood, because even in her like how she has her relationships with married men, it's like this is how I feel feminine, by being fully submissive. I'm like, oh no, like no, and obviously like there's like with consent, like obviously there are people who are fully okay with that because it's like this is consenting. But obviously for Reese, like she was verbally consenting, but you knew that like you're doing this to fill that need of like because I can't fully actually be a mother. This is the only way I know how to feel like to be a woman, which is to
Hmm.
be a subservient to a man,
Yeah.
which I don't even want to talk about Stanley. He was truly the worst. And the thing that didn't it did feel stock, like from a literature point of view, it did feel like a stock character, but I'm like I have to
And
think
also
about
his
like
name was Stanley.
also his name was Stanley. But I also have to think about like, okay, it's unfortunately not out of the range for any straight man to like immediately act this way to a trans woman. So I'm like,
Hmm.
this, which really sucks. And this is jumping all around, but obviously the big elephant in the room is Ames and his decision to detransition back to a man, which kind of like when I was reading the jacket copy, it did make it sound like because of that, that's why Reese what did the jacket copy said? It was because of that and everything fell apart, which I'm like
There were extenuating circumstances, and that I think was part of Reese's character, was that there was a
yeah.
real resistance of taking responsibility for
Yeah.
what was
Oh
going
my
on.
god. And like even the way she's described and stuff, it's like now I'll do my typical thing of like being passive aggressive and like being snarky. I was like, okay,
Yeah,
well, I guess she knows what she's doing.
yeah.
uh,
And I think even in those moments, like when she started cheating on Amy with Stanley, and she was
mhm.
like, I feel like I can't. I was in my mind, I was reading it, and I was like, well, I would simply walk away.
Yeah.
I don't like to me, I was like, how is this even a question? Like,
Yeah.
but I again, like there's a lot more involved
There's a
there.
lot more because yeah, I mean if you think about it like Amy and Reese's relationship was more than just like like a an adult relationship of like two lovers. It was like Amy looked up to Reese to basically guide her through her transition as a woman.
Hmm.
So and like not being open exactly to like what each other wants in the relationship obviously was already kind of like spelling out the end for their relationship. Um
And I
yeah.
think too that the thing about Reese was that she needed to be needed. I think specifically
Yeah.
about the when she went to go
Which
to
she related to motherhood. It's like that's
right,
what it means to be a mom.
right.
Like no,
When
girl.
she was at Talia's show and
Yeah.
she's out smoking a cigarette and someone walks past and she's like, that's my daughter in there.
Mhm.
And it's like that's what it's and so when it became that like Amy didn't really need Reese in that motherly sense anymore,
Yeah.
that was when it kind of that's when it all fell apart.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I
Yeah.
also say I honestly I would be more forgiving to Reese if she had gone to therapy. Like there was a line where it was like she'd never been to therapy, but she knew enough people who had that she had gleaned. And I was like, listen, and I know that it can be very traumatic for a trans woman to
Absolutely.
go to therapy and to find the
Absolutely.
right therapist who is going to treat her with respect and with dignity. So I get it.
Yes, yeah.
But also, you can no.
At this point you have PR money. Like you are a working professional
You
now.
know Mark Paul Gosselaar.
You know Gaza. Like you're fine. Okay? Uh okay. Speaking of elephants, let's talk about the elephant story.
Yeah.
There is a in I think like the way Ames's story is told in the book is so interesting. I think out of all of them, even though we were I think focused into Reese's like life, I think like Ames's history was so fascinating
Mhm.
that it almost the actual detransition almost became like okay, understandable or like not even the biggest thing because I think Ames trying to find to define his womanhood at the time in order to transition to Amy and then redefine what it means to be trans so that he could be Ames. I was like, wow, this is just it's so much. And there was a story that they share about this gang of elephants in Africa who like these three elephants who basically like rape and pillage rhinoceros like
Yeah.
and like I was like, "Oh
I
my god."
was
And like
horrified.
horrified, stomping children, like stomping villages. I was like, it was like super intense that I was like, what is going on? Which is so funny because I literally a couple days before reading it was just watching this doesn't matter, but this wrestler who like hunts like is a hunter and she was like, I'm not like a game hunter, but I also know that there's just sometimes like it's understanding like the balance of life. Like and like hunting in order to whatever blah, 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 blah. But I was like, oh my god, this sounds so terrible. And the way that they explained it was that because of what like poachers and hunters have done, these three orphan elephants basically had no structure in their lives because elephants are like a matriarchal society. So they were just like, wow, us three, we have nothing and no one. There was even that like story of like poachers will tie like baby elephants to their dead like
Mothers.
dead mothers so that they fully like dissociate and like leave and like whatever. I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh my god." So it's like it's that idea of like paralleling uh Amy's like journey, because they're acting out in spite of like what has been done to the structures around Amy and then
Mhm.
Ames. But I was just like, I was so shocked at reading that story. I was like, this is insane. Animals are insane.
Yeah.
My God. Oh.
It was a very precise metaphor,
Yeah.
or what's the word? I don't know. It was just so specific,
Yeah.
and it was very thought provoking.
It was. I think in context to at that time, it was like during when Amy was still in college, right? And like it was close to the story of like Amy going out meeting with someone online to like try clothes
Yeah.
at a mall or whatever. But it was just a very specific anecdote and metaphor to link the journey of basically like Amy trying to figure out their own gender identity. And I think it was very apparent that like Amy's journey was tied, I felt like really tied into like like her sex life and like how she fully dissociated, and that was like the only outlet for her to express that gender, because through sex and sexual acts, because it's like that's how our society is built. It's like, oh, you like girls clothing, then that means you are like that's erotic to you, which I don't even think like the story of Amy losing her virginity was like, oh my God, this is so not messed up, because it's like it made sense, but I was just like, oh my God, the like actual backflips that people have to go through in their mind to like dissociate and like make things make sense for
Mhm.
them. Like basically like er, Amy's sexual life before Reese really was like, I act out my masculinity because I am picturing myself doing me having those things done to them.
Mhm.
Which I mean, even Reese explains later on too that like a lot of like the straight men that kind of eroticize and fetishize trans women, it's because they're somehow like in their way subconscious, it's like, I wish I could do this. I wish
Mhm.
I could, this could be done to me, and this is the only way to like feel it or express it, which I don't know. It's just very sad that like our society like equates it to like a perversion or like
Yeah. I
ugh.
think as I'm thinking of it too, like the level of self-loathing there that I think is
Yeah.
so heartbreaking, especially because
Yeah.
I think that, like, to read a story about a pack of elephants raping rhinoceros and be like, "Oh, that's like my community." Like there has to be like my
Yeah.
heart just like really breaks for that, and to hear that kind of and that kind of conflict of not feeling as like for Amy to feel that out of place
Mhm.
where she thought that she would have belonged, like it
Yeah.
was something that she wanted. And like and really towards the very end of the book, there was a thing about like how her body was a dog, and that she could always
Yes.
always rely on it, but it wasn't fully her. And when she was Amy, there was no dog. And then when she detransitioned into Ames, it was like, is there a dog, or am like I don't know what relationship I have with my body anymore.
Mhm.
I think was and it's just it's I don't know.
It's just it's that the initial experience of Amy dissociating that just kept getting deeper and deeper, because
Hmm.
she just got better and better at it, to the point where when she transitioned to Ames, he couldn't now figure that out, because he had to like come face to face with it, because it's like, no, you actually have to like define what you are. You can't just like you can't just like be broken up by like whatever that soccer girl and then fully go into like the sports car or whatever happened in the mall or whatever.
Oh,
But
yeah, yeah, the captain of the lacrosse team.
yeah, I was like, what is this Saved by the Bell moment that's happening
Yeah.
right
Well,
now?
and I had to reread it because when I originally read it, I thought that the lacrosse captain, the girl, had gotten into the car with the friend and not
Yeah.
Amy. And so I was
Yeah.
like, what?
Yeah, it was very confusing too. But yes, the, I think that ended up being Ames's problem was that he was not equipped by the time he had to kind of like make a decision. But what I do like about Ames, I mean, and at the end of the book, it is Ames the ones that poses the question of like, this is our chance to finally break all of these cycles that we've put ourselves into. Which like Queen of Cycles herself, Reese, is like truly it's so bad. And I do feel like it's sad when you see like destructive cycles keep happening over and over again, especially when Reese and Katrina were actually getting
Yeah.
like close. And
Yeah.
I when I first when I got to the MLM scene of like, oh, there's an MLM involved now. They're at like a essential oils party.
Yeah. doTERRA.
Yeah, I think that's when I felt like this is what Reese wants. The absolute like boring, like easy problems that like straight white women have of like, do I, like when they were like writing their problems, she had
Yeah.
to literally be like, no, I'm gonna downplay it because no one has time for that. And all the women are like, post, just like writing their own stuff. And she's like, wow, like to be able to be like, that's it. Like
Yeah.
that I am able to write my main problem on a piece of paper for
Right.
this party.
Yeah. Can I want to ask you a question because again, I am coming at this from a very outsider perspective. It was
Yeah.
interesting to me, and we can talk too about how like Katrina outed Ames, but it was also interesting to me that Reese essentially revealed the pregnancy to Katrina's friends. And
Hmm.
I'm not saying this is on the same level in any way, shape, or form, but it
Yes.
was interesting to me that that happened because that is something that's very like it's a personal private thing and like
Yeah, if you like announce that someone's pregnant, like
and it
that's
wasn't there was no it maybe they had a conversation beforehand and it wasn't but it was just one of those things where I was like, well, that's not really great either.
yeah.
And again, it's not the same caliber, like it's a
Yeah.
very different thing, but it was just
But I think that goes back into like Katrina just not being a fully fleshed character, I think,
mhm,
because I think she would have reacted differently because it's like she's trying to make a good impression of like the whole conceit of her being them two at being at the parties because it's like I want you to like know my life or whatever. And
yeah.
yeah. But I did like that they were being friends. I
I
actually like
did
their
too.
I was like when they called it out when they were like, Ames already gave us what he needed. He doesn't really need to be involved anymore. If
Right.
he doesn't know what he wants to be, he can just be like, well, you already gave what you needed to give. So thank you
Yeah.
for your time. I was kind of excited for that. Like I thought it was so sweet when they were talking about the crib and like Reese was like, no, I don't think we need a crib because blah, blah, blah. Babies can sleep, whatever. And then Katrina was like, no, I need the crib. And so Reese gave in and was like, okay, fine, we'll have the crib. And then she looks later and realized that Katrina took off the crib. So it's like, they're clearly like, I don't think that's ever happened for Reese before of like me giving something and actually it being reciprocated.
Mhm.
Um, and so I was like, wow, I'm ready for the Reese Katrina story.
Right. Yeah.
So I really did feel bad about that. And I think like, yeah, like at the end, they there is a suicide scare, which I don't know. I really was like when it ended up not being an actual suicide, that it was this like weird like YouTube personality, like
Mhm.
I'm freezing myself to kind of like
Scandinavian
yes,
alien.
like to like refresh my mind or whatever, but everyone thought it was a suicide attempt because I'm trans and people will just assume that, whatever. Um, but that kind of led to, that was almost like the last piece of the puzzle for Katrina to be like, I really don't think I can do this because this structure is so unstable, us three. I don't know what's going to happen. And so she does decide to terminate the pregnancy, but as it's, were they at the actual waiting room about to do
No, they
it?
were in the apartment. It was like several hours beforehand, and they were in the apartment sitting and
Okay.
talking.
Yes. That's when Ames kind of says, like, look, this is our opportunity to actually break whatever cycle we keep putting ourselves in. We can finally actually create our own family. And then it just ends there.
Yeah.
We don't really know what happens. But yeah, it's interesting to kind of show this, like, it's a never ending journey. I think that's the hardest part. It's that, like, you have to just move and decide things as not completed people, which in the trans perspective is 20 million times harder because
Mm-hmm.
they've essentially have never been the right people from the very beginning of their lives, which is just
Mm-hmm.
so sad. Like, that's just
Yeah.
so much. Um, so I did kind of like leave with an appreciation at the end of the book of like, okay, even though I do wish, it ends like in a way where they make a decision or even just like an epilogue, something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it did kind of leave me with that feeling of like, oh yeah, I understand that this was the point, is that there is no end,
Right.
unfortunately.
Yeah. I think what I was really missing
Mhm.
was like a fuck the patriarchy moment, or like, you know what I'm saying? Because
Yeah.
I think that there were a lot of really good points about like internalized homophobia and
Mhm.
internalized transphobia, and I think that they're very valid points, but I also think that like it's it doesn't inherently make a person bad if they're like trying to get past it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not phrasing it the right way. But
S-
like I think so like when Katrina finds out that Reese is having an affair with one of her friend's husbands,
mhm.
and she finds out that her friend's husband tested positive for HIV but has since, I don't know the correct terminology.
Undetectable.
It's
Yeah,
now
he's
undetectable.
mhm.
And there was this moment where Reese was like, "I'm sorry that you're having this kind of like gay panic about HIV AIDS," and like Katrina then did later admit like, "Yeah." And I think that's something that like, as a woman who is not steeped in the culture, like it makes sense that like when you think about HIV AIDS, like it's not spoken about in the same
No
way,
one knows.
like
Yeah.
where it's like, I could see like her not knowing about PrEP and not knowing about like how far research has come where you can be
Mhm.
undetectable and you can live a life that's relatively normal,
Yeah.
compared to like what it was in like the late 80s and early 90s.
Mhm.
um and so I felt like there was, I wanted to be, and maybe this is unfair of me because I've been very harsh about Reese, but I think that there was some part of me that wanted to be like, but you're not giving enough grace to the character, and you're not putting enough
Mhm.
blame on like the society that created
They
these kind of
they're yeah.
underlying currents of
Yeah.
discrimination or prejudice or what have you.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I definitely see that. I think it was just, I believe the way that they just did it is to just like show the flaws, and shows like how that's meant for us to kind of take away, which I agree. I think I wish the characters themselves kind of like inhibited that more, because it was like they were aware of things like that, but just like too scared to really like act on it. Which, I mean, that's, I guess it still goes back to the ending. I think that is kind of like the biggest fuck you to the society. Like, we can just make our own thing.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I don't know. It just, I felt like that could have been decided a lot earlier. Like, I don't know, like, but then we are only on the first trimester. As I was
Yeah.
doing the math, I was like, it's literally just like 3 months after. I was like,
Mhm.
oh,
Yeah.
and they've already been talking about it. Like, this baby is going to come any minute. Um,
Right.
like when they were doing the baby registry, I was like, it's not happening yet. It's like,
Mhm.
it's like we're 2 months in,
Yeah.
which I don't know how that works. Is that how early baby registries are meant to be made?
Well, I would say that typically speaking, you wouldn't really publicly tell people about it unless they were close friends and family until you were in the
Yeah.
second trimester.
That's what I
So
thought too.
it
Yeah.
does feel a little early, especially given the fact that Katrina has had a miscarriage in the past
Hmm.
and the fact that she drank very heavily. Like,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
and that she was, older. But
Yeah.
also,
And
it's
there
their,
it was.
it's their choice, and it was clearly a bonding moment for them. And,
Yeah, that's true.
I'm not going to.
It was very interesting to kind of, again, I think going back to the Katrina discussion, there were so many tidbits about her personality and her character that I would have loved to see, even not necessarily the same detail as we did with Amy's background, but at least just enough to kind of be like the divorce, the miscarriages,
Mhm.
the growing up like a mixed race. Like what is that about? Like they kept hinting at it, but I do feel like it was the author's intent to be like, knowing my experience, this is the experience that I can write towards. Which is just, I guess it's just interesting because it's like, yeah, you could read a million other books about a cisgendered woman
Right.
going through motherhood, but it sucks because it's like she is the person that ultimately becomes a plot device, which is the
Mhm.
eternal problem of women in media.
And I think though, to be like totally fair, how many other books would the trans woman be the plot device? Where like, what if this book
Yeah.
was told from Katrina's friend's point of view? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Where it's like, and Reese is just the plot device that's having an affair with her husband. So I think
Yeah.
I I feel like take my criticism with a grain of salt, because how many other like instances in our in pop culture that like this has happened. So and
Hmm.
I'm like, this one time, okay, I'm done.
Yeah. No, I totally see that. I totally agree. But I will say, as we wrap up the book, like, I think my biggest takeaway truly is that, like, the the leaps and bounds of how gender can really fuck up a person, like,
Ugh.
even not like, to the point where I think, like, how Amy, like, growing up, I think, like, that was really when it hit me really hard, of like getting those first initial thoughts of what it means to be a woman, or like how to express my gender, really literally like carries you until the very, like, to your present,
Hmm.
which is just sad. And yeah, I just felt really bad for that.
I would actually love a sequel where Katrina ends up not having an abortion and they raise the baby, because there was a little part where they were saying that they were talking about the baby and they always used she, or like,
Hmm.
she, her. And I was like, I would love to see them raise the child and how they dealt with gender with
Yeah.
their child. That I
Yeah,
would
me
I would
too.
read a sequel.
I would read
Detransition baby too. Detransition babies.
babies. It's like
I would read
alien
it.
aliens.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
It's
exactly.
like, yeah, I would read that too.
I would
I
read
think
it.
they did a really, really good job of kind of posing that question of like, it is possible. How could it really look like? And I think what was the craziest part was that this entire time I was like, or leading up to reading the book, I was like, I can't believe we're talking about detransitioning. Like, it feels like we have made leaps and bounds. I was kind of like in Reese's point of view of like, we've made leaps and bounds just to like get trans stories as like a, like something that the just culture accepts, and like to kind of talk about like, well, there are people that will detransition because it's not what they expect. And I really thought
Mhm.
that was going to be like really debunking what that means, and it really wasn't. Like, it's kind of like just it happens. It is something that can happen as well,
Yeah.
but it's like, it's just a part. These are all just steps, and it's yeah, like, the world can just like see them as like, these are just steps and for a person to find themselves. and it's available for anyone. So
I also just want to display my ignorance again, just in case people are like, she thinks she knows. I didn't realize that like detransition was a thing, and I don't know why it wouldn't in my head,
yeah,
but I just had never thought about it before, and so it was like that was another aspect of the book where I was like, interesting that this is something that happens.
something that even happens. Yeah,
Which
I mean,
makes sense
full.
because, if people have a very fluid idea of gender and,
Yeah.
okay.
I do think like, because like in my personal experience, in RuPaul's Drag Race, a lot of those contestants have transition and then detransition because they end up finding drag as like, oh, this is the outlet that I'm looking for. But because we don't have these options or are not visibly seen all the time, people just assume like, oh, I'm clearly just like in the wrong body. So I think it's important to kind of show all facets of what it means to be trans, to kind of normalize it and not make it stigmatized, so that any kind of option or avenue is available for anyone that could be questioning or curious about their own identities. So I definitely still enjoyed the book. I think it was like just really thought provoking and very appreciative that I got to see the dirty and the good of the trans experience, because
Mm-hmm.
we always kind of see them as like just like deviant or really traumatizing, which I mean it can be, but I like seeing all the different things, so that way we just have a better understanding of it.
Yeah. I think, and this is when I was talking about I May Destroy You. I was I was talking to some people recently, and I was saying like it's very challenging, but it's also vital, which is the same thing that
Mm-hmm.
I feel about this book. Like it's like having these conversations, thinking about these things, and um, shining a light on them for ignorant, you know, cis women like me is so important.
Yeah,
And like I'm really happy for Torrey Peters that this book is getting great publicity, and I wish
yeah, it's
her
doing well.
so much success.
Yeah, absolutely. To our one running bit in the show is who was the hottest character, and I think it's the like Swedish swimmer that Reese like first falls in love with
Oh my god.
when she was a waitress, and then moves to New York, and then like moves back to Europe, and it's like, I don't want to bring you here, sorry.
I think mine is Ames's college friend. What was his name? Joe?
John.
John.
Yeah,
At the
it was just
end that
like,
they went and played baseball with.
and I the entire time I was like, wow, that's awesome to be like, the only reason I am friends with this person is that once in a blue moon we'll meet and just like share our deepest thoughts and meanings to each other and try to help each other out and then like disappear again. And like I was like, that's nice.
Mm-hmm.
That is the healthiest relationship in this book.
Yeah. And then it was just like when Amy is a woman, Amy is a woman. When Ames is Ames, Ames is, I was like,
Yeah. Yeah, and it was kind of cute to be like when as Amy, like John was like holding the door open for her, and like just because he was just like very himbo energy of like, I just want to be a polite gentleman.
mm-hmm.
And then when back he's the man, he's like, yeah, you want to hit some, go to the batting cage or whatever.
Go to the batting cage. A real when Harry met Sally moment.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Allie, for joining me in another episode of the book club. We're very excited. Our next month's book will be a book that you may have seen in the past because it was released in like 2019. But it is a book called My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyin Khan Braithwaite. I have had this book in my shelf collecting dust. I'm so excited that you brought it up today because I was like, oh, yes, I can read that one. So we'll be posting that. We're actually posting a link to get that book and all of the books from the book club because we are now an affiliate of Bookshop. So I'll be posting that link on the description below and on our website and our social media. So don't worry, you can get a copy of that book and all the books that we've read. Thank you so much for watching and listening along. You can follow us on social media at the Ampliverse on Twitter and Instagram. Our Discord server is also linked on the episode where you can join in the conversation. And finally, if you love the show and the others we do here, feel obliged to drop a tip or two. You can do that on our Ko-fi, which helps support keeping the lights on in our universe. Thank you again, Allie, and thank you, everyone. We'll see you next month.
Discovering voices, building worlds.